Strength in Leos.
How's it going, everybody? It's Evan back with the Strength in Leos podcast. Super excited to come to you guys with another great episode with you guys today. Today we have another great, awesome guest. We have Garrick Demeyer of Royal Constrictor Designs. So, Garrick, how's it going today?
It's going great. I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good. Yeah, super pumped to have you on. It's been a while in the making. We've been trying to get the timing and everything right. I know you're like a super busy guy, so really glad that we're able to finally get you on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on. It was a long time. I know you first contacted me probably maybe even a couple of years ago, or at least a year ago at this point. And finally glad we could make our schedules work out.
Yeah, definitely. And then also just the fact that you have just so much history in the reptile hobby and so much knowledge I know that you have. So you're just like a must-have guest on this show. And I'm glad that, eventually it finally got to work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for people who aren't like familiar with who you are, I know you started off in, different kind of reptiles and then you veered away, but now you're working exclusively pretty much with ball pythons. So for anyone who doesn't know a lot about your history and your background, for my audience, can you give a little bit of background about who you are, how long you've been in the industry and what you kind of do now?
Yeah, well, I've been breeding reptiles for about 30 years. I actually started with giant day geckos and then I quickly moved into leopard geckos and crested geckos and bearded dragons and veiled chameleons. When I was in college, I decided I wanted to try to breed a few different types of geckos, and I was able to do it. And I saw that there was a demand in the market for them. So I started producing more and more of them. And eventually I figured out that maybe I could do this for a full-time thing after I graduated. So that's what I did. And it took me about 4 years after I graduated college to make it a full-time business. But when I went full-time, I was primarily breeding bearded dragons, veiled chameleons, leopard geckos, and crested geckos. And for probably about, I'd say 13 or 14 years, I produced about 4,000 geckos a year. I was able to make a lot of world's firsts at the time. And this is going back a few years now, but at the time I made several world's first leopard geckos. And then my interest kind of went more towards the ball pythons, just with all the different genetics involved with them. I mean, leopard geckos have a lot of different genetics too, but ball pythons was kind of interesting me a little bit more. So I made the point about 10 years ago, I decided to cut back on all the geckos that I was producing and the bearded dragons and everything else and focus more on ball pythons. And because I love leopard geckos and geckos in general, I still do have a small hobbyist level of them. But, right now I'm mostly breeding ball pythons.
Awesome. And about what year was that? Like you're breeding in college, you said, and then you go on commercially. So what year?
Yeah, I think I hatched my first geckos in I think it was 1992. And by I graduated from high school in 91 and then I went to college in 92. And probably by the time I was a junior in college, I think that's kind of when I decided that this is what I wanted to do. And I was just going to do whatever it took to get to this point, whatever it took to do this as a living. I never had any interest in just like punching a clock and working for somebody else. I always was kind of independent, kind of wanted to do my own thing. And I couldn't see going to work for 40 or more hours a week doing something I didn't enjoy. Like I figured, I think that you should enjoy your life. If work makes you miserable, you shouldn't do it, and figure out a way around it. And so I decided, I love breeding reptiles and that's what I want to do. And I got really good at it over the years. And I'm sure if I would have kept with the geckos, I'd be just as successful. I was really good at them. I mean, it was almost on automatic for breeding them at that point on a large scale. But yeah, it's just, it was my calling. If I won the lottery tonight, I would probably still be breeding reptiles tomorrow and for the next 10 years because it's just what I love to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And especially from such a young age, I think it's really cool that you had that mindset that, this is like something I want to do forever. You see a lot of people working for 10, 15, 20 years before they make that jump into working full time. And you kind of had that from the jump, it sounds like.
Yeah. When I went when I graduated high school, I had no clue what I wanted to do. This is back in the early 90s. So this breeding reptiles as a profession, a full-time profession, was not common back then at all. There was very, very few people doing it. And so I just kind of, it never even crossed my mind. I mean, I always had tanks in my bedroom growing up with different types of lizards and geckos and things in them. And I never once thought, like up through high school, I never once thought about being able to breed them for a living. Like I still, when I think back to those days, I still can't believe that I'm doing this for a living. I mean, it's just crazy from I think back, having a display tank with like 6 or 7 lizards in it when I was in high school. I couldn't imagine what that had morphed into over the years. But so when I went to college, I had an undeclared major. So I was just taking general courses and hoping that something would click with me and that I would find an interest that I actually wanted to do. And I went on a natural resources field trip to Costa Rica. I think it was between it was like winter of 1992, spring of 1993. I was there for 3 weeks. And that kind of unlocked my need to work with animals for a career, especially reptiles. I mean, I was down there. I caught a basilisk by hand. I caught a coral snake, boa constrictors, all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I have to do something working with reptiles for my career. And at the time, it was like, okay, well, I can get a job at a zoo, but then you have to move to a bigger city because there aren't too many small, cities that have zoos. So I decided that I wanted to try my hand at breeding some stuff, and I was able to do it. And when I was in college, I actually I did a couple internships at some zoos. I worked for the Sedgwick County Zoo in Wichita, Kansas, during the winter break of 1995, 96. And then the next year, actually right after I graduated, I had an internship at the Houston Zoo in Texas. And when I was down there, we actually went to San Antonio and toured their zoo. And then I was able to go to Boerne, Texas and visit Ron Tremper, who is basically like the godfather of everything leopard gecko, and Dave and Tracy Barker, who are basically the godparents of everything ball python. So I was able to tour their facilities and spend like a half a day with each of them. And it was an incredible experience. And it really taught me that I could actually do something like what they were doing. And yeah, sure enough, I was able to do it, but it took a lot of work. I mean, it was not easy, and it's still not easy. I'm working more hours now than I was when I'm 50 years old now. I was working a few hours when I was 30, and it's just a lot of work. And but it's totally worth it. It's what I love to do.
Right. Yeah. And it's cool that you're able to catch that vision from people who were breeding, and especially just capstones and herpetology in general. You see, Ron Tremper, obviously for leopard geckos, and the Barkers with ball pythons and just a lot of pythons in general. It's really cool that you had that vision, especially because not many people back then were doing it the way that they were doing it, setting up commercial breeding in the way that they were doing it, and finding a way to breed in a way that was successful, that cared for the ways that they were doing things, but also on the cutting edge of like morphs and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it was really awesome to hear just that story of you really catching that vision from a young age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, seeing both of their facilities firsthand and actually going through them and seeing exactly how they have everything set up was so important for me to develop my first facility, or my breeding facility that I have. I took bits and pieces of what I learned from their places and kind of changed things, because I'm way up north here in Wisconsin, and
right.
So you got to do things a little differently than in Texas. But I was able to figure it out and set up something that kind of was similar to their situations, but very different as well. But yeah, it was a great experience to see like how Ron had all of his leopard gecko colony set up. And my first leopard gecko rack, I built this 23-foot long rack in my basement of my old house, and I had like 150 leopard gecko colonies in there in
wow.
30 quart Rubbermaid tubs. And a friend of mine and I just built that rack by ourselves and set it all up, and that's basically, I learned that from I emulated what Ron had in his facility at the time. And then with the ball pythons too, I saw my first, some of my first albinos, my first pieds, my first clowns, all that stuff I saw down there for the first time. And that really gave me the inspiration to start working with all of those animals too.
Yeah. So when it came to mentorship, obviously the internet wasn't how it is now when it comes to resources. You didn't have, forums, Facebook groups, wasn't the same at all. So how did you get all the information that you needed to start breeding the way that you did? And then also just getting information to start building a commercial breeding facility, because it's a lot of work that goes into it. And it's not something that you could just like pick up a hammer one day and like, okay, we're going to start building racks. So how'd you get all the information and start making connections with those things?
Yeah, a lot of it came down to touring those two facilities. But I mean, the origins of my business was before then. But at the time, I had like aquariums and tanks and cages and stuff set up. And we home built our own veiled chameleon cages, out of wood and wire. And it was all like back then, there wasn't all the different commercial options out there for racks and caging and stuff. There was mostly just, if you wanted to make a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot chameleon cage, you had to do it yourself because there was nothing out there available. So yeah, that's what I did. We basically, my parents helped me a lot too. They helped me build a lot of the stuff. And, it was just, it was mostly home built at first. And the ideas behind how to set this up, a lot of that was from Dave and Tracy and also Ron. It was, but some of it was trial and error. I mean, most of what I know is self-taught or from talking to other people. There was not the internet was just barely getting started back then. So like kingsnake.com was around then. That's where I initially started selling animals, but there was not like the wealth of knowledge about how to do things. Like, I mean, if you want to learn how to breed a ball python or breed a leopard gecko or a crested gecko or whatever, you can learn it pretty quickly online. Learning about it and actually doing it yourself is a different thing. I mean, not everybody that wants to breed a ball python can breed a ball python, but if you at least learn the basis of it, you can always tweak things and kind of figure it out for your exact situation and make it work.
Yeah, that's actually a good kind of segue into another question I wanted to ask. So you're in, Wisconsin, gets cold up here, frigid winters, really dry winters. And then the weather down south is completely different, really humid, really hot. So what was it like adjusting and making adjustments from the enclosures that they had down south from those people and then transferring that to kind of a Wisconsin facility?
I mean, facilities, a good facility is going to be pretty climate controlled anyway. Like it can be 20 below zero outside, and my shop during the day is still 80 degrees, and at night it's like 75. So I don't really think I had to really make a whole lot of adjustments, maybe with the temperatures of like the hot spots and things, I might have had to change a little bit. But I mean, like a rack with leopard geckos in it, it's, you're going to set your hot spots and you're going to have your ambient temperature in there. So it wasn't really a whole lot of difference that I really had to adapt to. But, but I had at the time when I first started, I was doing it in my parents' basement, and they, once I went full time with it, they actually sold me that house because I had their whole basement full of reptiles, which I'm so thankful they were actually willing to let me do all that. Like I was lucky. I went to college only about 20 miles from my parents' house. So I was able to come back 1 or 2 times during the week and also on the weekend. And that was in addition to going to school full time and having a part-time job on campus and having a part-time job at a pet store too. So I was always running all the time. And it was, so anyway, I started the business in their basement, and then I ended up buying the house from them because it was easier to move them than it would be to move all these animals. And they were ready for a new place at that point anyway. So, I kept the basement climate controlled really well. I mean, if you went down into the basement, it was hot down there. It was, there was probably 50 bearded dragons in there and 20 veiled chameleons and hundreds of leopard geckos. So, I mean, with all the heating elements involved with keeping those animals comfortable, the basement was pretty hot. So I didn't really have to make any huge adjustments from there, just mostly just, hot spots. But the ambient temperature was really good down there.
Gotcha.
And then in 2003, I bought a piece of land. Well, my wife and I actually bought a house just outside of Wausau, and we bought it's out in the country a little bit. We bought a piece of land next to the house that was a separate piece of property, and actually built my facility, which I still run my business out of. And my facility now is somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 square feet, I would say. And initially, when I first moved there, which we built it in 2003, and we moved animals in January 2004. And, initially it was, bearded dragons, veiled chameleons, leopard geckos, crested geckos, ball pythons, boas, green tree pythons, jungle carpet pythons, blood pythons, colubrids. I mean, I had a lot of different
everything.
Things. Yeah. And I actually, not to segue too much away from the question, but I actually do love to work with a lot of different animals. And ball pythons are the most financially, feasible animal for me to work with, but I miss the diversity that I used to have. I loved I love going into my facility and seeing some big panther chameleons or veiled chameleons and things like that. But it's so much work just to keep up with what I have right now. I can't really see actually getting more species back in the shop again. It's just a lot of different care regimens, like the care that a colony of geckos needs versus a pair of ball pythons versus a green tree python versus a hognose snake or something like that. Like, it's all so different. And so that's why I decided to make the move mostly to ball pythons. So when I first built the facility, I had a bunch of different species in there. And then over the course of probably the next 10 years, it just my interest kind of got more into ball pythons. So I decided to cut back on all the other species just to make my life easier. It was just so hard to keep up with all the different care regimens of all those different species.
Right. And you also see that a lot more in old school keepers, like those guys we were talking about, the Barkers and Ron Shrimper. They all had just such a variety of different things, a lot of cool things. They'd have like lists that they'd send out to people with different species and stuff like that. So it totally makes sense about like just loving the diversity and all the different kind of reptiles that you had to offer back then.
Yeah, I still have all my old price lists. So back in the early 90s, when I was first getting into this, you could subscribe to price lists. And so I get Tom Crutchfield's price list. I get Glade's Herp was a big one, and they would send out a monthly price list, and you'd open it up and you'd see all these different awesome species that you could get. I mean, I remember on Glade's Herp's price list seeing like Parsons chameleons for $125. Now
really?
Last time I checked, they were around 1,000 a piece. They're probably higher than that now, but it was they had such a gigantic diversity of species on there. And I just love getting that price list and opening it up and looking at everything and just imagine like, oh, I should buy that. I should buy that. Really, it was crazy. All the different species that those people were bringing in. A lot of them were imported, of course, at the time, and just all the different species that you could readily acquire. You can get like a prehensile-tailed skink for like $100 back then.
Wow.
I'm sure they're over 1,000 now too, and it's just really changed a lot over the years. But yeah, I'm like I said, I still have all those old price lists. They're in a file cabinet. I think they're at my shop. But every once in a while, I like to look through those and like reminisce about the old days. It was really cool.
Yeah. No, that's also so tempting when you're getting those price lists basically sent to your door. So you're just checking the mail and then you're like, oh, what can I get this month kind of thing. And, you're just getting, subscription to reptiles. So that's actually really funny.
Yeah.
Super tempting.
Yeah. All the old Reptiles magazines from back then, because Reptiles Magazine started in 1992. And a friend of mine actually just he actually saw the first issue at a store and he bought it for me because he knew I'd like it. And ever since then, I think I have every issue that ever came out up until probably about a year ago. I think I stopped subscribing to it.
Wow,
man! But yeah, I mean, I've got in my basement here at the house, I've got hundreds and hundreds of issues of Reptiles Magazine, and it's amazing going back and like looking through the classified ads on that. seeing like albino Burmese pythons for like, $2,500 or something, and albino ball pythons for $7,500, and green tree pythons for $750. Like just all those different prices and just all the different species that you can get back then. And what was like at the time, like the pinnacle, like the albino Burmese python was like the thing, back then, because it was the first albino snake that was commercially, it was the first albino python anyway that was commercially available. And it's just amazing to see like how far things have come since then.
Definitely. Yeah. So was it like just seeing the history of herpetoculture change over the decades? And also you as someone who's commercially breeding and breeding things as a business, like what has it been like not only seeing the changes, but being able to keep up with all the changes through social media, just breeding practices and all those different things?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the technology, especially from a keeper standpoint. Like the different things that are available to somebody that just wants a pet snake or a pet lizard or a pet frog or whatever. The number of different products available now, whether it's lighting, bedding, backgrounds for your naturalistic tanks, like stuff like that is amazing. Like we had to so much just figure it out ourselves back in those days. Like I'm out there, taking branches from trees and stuff to, use as displays, and, moss from the wild. And it's just amazing how many different things are out there geared specifically for people that want to keep reptiles. Like reptiles are so much more popular as pets now than they were back then. And they were getting popular back then too, but it's still amazing how the quality of the products. Like you don't necessarily, if you want to heat your reptile, you got a bearded dragon and you want to heat it, you don't have to go out there and buy a heat rock. That's all that was available back. Well, I'm probably going back further than when I started breeding, but when I first got my first lizards, just put a heat rock under it. Like, okay. And then, they scorch their stomachs and die. And, it's just amazing, the technology and the different array of products that are available now versus even 10 years ago, but definitely like 30 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've been able to like keep up with all the different changes and, just be able to adapt the way that the hobby's been adapting?
I'm trying to. I mean, social media, like I work so much. I don't have a whole lot of time to spend on Facebook or Instagram, YouTube. I obviously do. I have a YouTube channel that I've been doing for over 10 years now. So I try to keep up with it as much as I can. But, for me, like, I love working with the animals. I don't necessarily like to sit in front of a computer and do computer stuff all day long, like answering emails and uploading videos and things like that. Like that's not why I got into reptiles. I got into reptiles because I like being hands-on with them and working with them. And I do a lot of the work with the animals myself. I do have employees that help me with all this stuff, but I like my happiest days of the week when I'm working is when I actually get to be hands-on with the animals and actually water them and clean their cages and assess their health. And like, that's my favorite part of it. I love it. Like that's actually, for the next couple of days, that's my main thing that I'm going to be doing is just watering and cleaning all my holdbacks and all my breeder ball pythons. And I'm completely happy doing that. I love it. But, I do try to keep up with, the different trends and, all social media and all that stuff. But, I can only do so much because, like I said, my main interest is working with the animals themselves. And I do like interacting with customers a lot. I mean, I like going to shows. I like, I don't mind, emailing people and calling people and talking to people on the phone and stuff like that. It's all part of the business. But my true favorite part of working with animals is actually working with the animals.
Yeah, you usually see kind of the opposite thing happen where most people who start reptile businesses, kind of the bigger they get, the less involved with the animals they get. But it seems for you that you're just still continuing to be involved in it, which is also really cool.
I feel like my breeding success is a lot higher if I'm doing as much of the work as I can. About 12 years ago, I had several employees and I turned over a lot of the care to them. And I felt like I was basically like a customer service rep for my own company. Like all I really did was answer to emails, pack shipments, did the YouTube stuff. I wasn't as hands on with the animals as I wanted to be. And so I made some changes and I took over a lot more of the actual animal maintenance myself. And I feel like I'm happier doing that. I feel like I'm working more hours than what I would like to. I mean, I would love to be able to work like a 40-hour work week. That would be like a vacation to me. Right now, I'm working 55 to 60 hours a week generally, which I know
Wow.
there's a lot of people out there that work more than that and probably a lot harder than I do too. But, it's still, I'd like to maybe tone my work week back just a little bit. So I've been trying to like let other people do some of the things that I do just to kind of make it a little bit easier on me. I want a little bit more freedom to travel. And, my kids are getting older. I've got a junior in high school and a sixth grader. And, I kind of want to be able to do more things with them too and not be shackled to work quite as much because, they're not getting any younger and, I just want to spend time with them too. So, but it's hard. It's hard to find that balance between overworking yourself and not working enough. And I mean, really, if I have a day off, I almost feel guilty. It's so weird. Like I'm so used to working all the time that if I take a couple of days off, it's weird. Like I don't know. Like I feel like I should be doing something for work, and I'm just trying to
Right.
kind of get out of that frame of mind a little bit. And I love I get most of my work done Monday through Friday. I want either my employee or I have to go into the shop every day on the weekend as well, just to make sure everything is, there's no like thermostat alarms going off or anything like that. So but overall, I try to get all my work done Monday through Friday so I can have that weekend off to kind of recharge and get ready for the next week. Because I really do feel like I'm doing a better job if I go into work and I'm actually happy to be there and ambitious to get stuff done. And but that little bit of time away from work really helps a lot to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely a common trend within reptile breeders. It's like they just no work-life balance. It's just all, kind of working it all the time and being able to work with live animals. It's definitely, like you mentioned, it's definitely not only just a risk, but it's something you have to sacrifice for. And it's something you love to do. So for you, it's probably like the trade-off is great in terms of like what you're able to do and doing what you love, but also being able to just work with animals all the time.
Yeah, I mean it's essentially farming. I'm farming ball pythons right now, and man, like any farmer, it's hard to get away from the work. Like most farmers have to be there all the time, and I'm kind of like that too. I mean, it's hard for me to take a vacation. I have been getting better over the last 5 years. I've been able to take about 2 full weeks off per year. Not the same, not 2 consecutive weeks, but 2 full weeks, like usually one in summer and one in for spring break when my kids are off of school for a week. So, I've been a little bit better at figuring out how to do that. But it is hard. I mean, most of the time I need to be there because if things are laying eggs, if babies are hatching, I can't be gone during that. So it's a challenge to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, to be a full-time breeder, you got to put in the hours and you got to be organized about it. And you really got to, you got to work hard. And sometimes it takes years. I mean, it took me probably from when I started my business to when I went full time, I think it was 6 years. And I was doing it full time, but not making much money at all. I mean, I was making enough to, for a single person to own a house and run the business. I was doing okay with that. But I mean, I was not exactly like, making a real big profit or anything. So, but I continued to work hard and really, give it everything I could. And I built the business up really, really nicely. Like we're making a really good living now. We have a nice house here and, nice property and, my business is paid for, the building is paid for, the house is paid for, everything is paid for now through all the hard work that I've done over the years. So, finally being able to kind of, enjoy some of the results of all that hard work.
Yeah. So Typical day going into the shop. What does a typical day look like for you?
It all depends on the day of the week. So to keep up with as many animals, because right now I probably have, I'd say 650, give or take, maybe 700 adult female ball pythons, probably 200 male adult ball pythons, and right now we probably have 1,000 babies right now that are available, and then a few hundred holdbacks too. So to keep up with all that, like obviously you can't like feed all those in a single day or water and clean all those in a single day. So we try to schedule certain things to do on certain days of the week so that everything gets done and everything is well taken care of. So a typical day, like tomorrow, I will go into the shop. I'll answer emails for a few hours. I might try to shoot a YouTube video if I can figure out something to shoot it on. And I've got a few other small things to do. And then I'm going to be basically watering and cleaning all of my holdbacks. So hopefully by the time I get to that point, I'll probably get into work around 7:30 in the morning. By 10:30, 11 o'clock, I'll be done with the other things that I have to do. And then it'll just be watering and cleaning holdbacks the rest of the day. And then on Friday, it's actually going to be mostly the same thing. And today we pack shipments all morning long. I think I had 28 orders going out today. So that took all morning. My wife came over and helped me label and kind of get everything packed up. So once I got done with that, then I had to go into feeding mode, because Wednesdays are the days of the week that we feed all the hatchling ball pythons. So we had to feed about 1,000 baby ball pythons today after packing all those shipments up. So, that's what it is. Just a combination of, shipping, answering emails, other customer service related things, and the care of the animals, whether it's feeding or watering and cleaning. So that's basically what I do.
Yeah. Tons of work, like you mentioned before. Yeah, definitely a grind. But going back to like one of the biggest reasons, love the work that you do, obviously. Love the work that you've done with geckos over the years. So starting off, and you had CrestedGecko.com. So how did that come to fruition and getting that started?
Well, I came up with the idea for the website, CrestedGecko.com. This is going back to probably 1998-ish, 88 or 98 or 99. Ron Tremper came out with LeopardGecko.com. And so obviously if you were doing a search online for leopard geckos, that would be probably the first site that would come up. So I thought, and I was getting into Crested Gecko. I'd been breeding leopard geckos for several years already, and I was getting into Crested Geckos. And I decided, well, what would be because I wanted to really focus on Crested Geckos. And I decided, okay, well, I'm just going to do CrestedGecko.com. And I searched for the domain. Nobody owned it at the time, so I bought it, and I've had it ever since. And so I built my own website from scratch on my own using, Front Page, I think was the name of the program. Okay. Very primitive website compared to now, but yeah, I started that website up, and I sold my leopard geckos and crested geckos and everything else I worked with through that website. And then once I got more into ball pythons, I decided the name CrestedGecko.com wasn't really going to work that well to try to sell ball pythons. So I came up with Royal Constrictor Designs, because ball pythons are royal pythons everywhere else in the world other than in the US, and they're constrictors. And at the time I worked with boa constrictors and blood pythons and things like that as well. And then designs, because I'm working on designer morphs of all those species. So that's kind of where that morphed into. And now we actually don't have the website CrestedGecko.com anymore. I still own the domain name, but I'm not actually actively selling geckos online anymore, just because I produce so few of them now. I actually wish that I had more time to work on leopard gecko projects and crested geckos and things like that, because I'm seeing some of these breeders out there are coming up with just mind-blowing animals, and I don't keep up with them very well. I see them online on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, and at shows, but I don't even really understand all of the genetics of some of these newer morphs that are out now. But I know that they're just awesome. Like I've seen some really impressive geckos lately. And it just kind of gives me a little bit of nostalgia, like back when I used to really strive to make like new morphs of leopard geckos and crested geckos. And I do miss those days a lot. I wish I had more time to work with those species as well as what I already do.
All right, yeah. Hopefully, you'll be able to get back into some stuff and start bringing a few more geckos than usual.
Back drastically in order to get more time in for other stuff, but I'd like to. I mean, I don't know. I love all reptiles, and I wish that I could have a couple of pairs of everything. You know, like I don't know. Even as a kid, I loved having all different types of species, and I do miss that aspect of reptile keeping. Like, to be like a little bit more of a hobbyist level where you just have like a room with a bunch of different display tanks and with all kinds of different species. Like, I really miss that a lot. But for me, I spend so many hours a week working with them for my career. I can't imagine coming home and taking care of like a hobbyist level collection in addition to that. I just know I wouldn't be able to give it my full enthusiasm because I'm working so hard at my business.
Yeah. So with the leopard geckos, what inspired you to get into leopard geckos? They're like super easy, awesome pet. Really popular back in the day and even continuing now. But what did you find the most interesting or the most rewarding with them while you were breeding them?
Well, so when I first started getting into breeding geckos, I started with giant day geckos, and then I very quickly decided to get some Europlatus leaf-tailed geckos. And I was experimenting with a lot of different species of geckos. And I figured out after a couple of years of messing around with all these difficult species that were mostly imported at the time, I thought that, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to do this as a career is if I figure out what species are the most commercially viable and which ones am I good at breeding. And leopard geckos they were a natural fit. I mean, I've been breeding them for a few years, and like, I know I can breed like this colony of leopard geckos that I have. I know I can breed them, no problem. Well, all I have to do is set up more colonies like that, and I can make more of them. And the more of them that I make, the more profitable I should be. And so that's kind of why I went into leopard geckos so heavily. I mean, for probably 15 years, I was producing probably 3,000 leopard geckos a year. And that was mostly just by myself. So
that's a crazy collection to keep up by yourself too.
Yeah. And I got really good at that. And that was with having the bearded dragons and chameleons. That was with having all that other stuff too. But I really, and then, back then some of the morphs first started coming out, like, the jungles and the stripes started coming out and the patternless. And then, eventually the albinos. I got one of Ron Tremper's first albinos that he ever produced. So his first year of selling albinos, I bought an albino male, and I think it was 50% possible het females from him. And I got them all in one big shipment, and I started breeding all those. And the next year I produced a few albinos, and then I held a bunch of them back, and then I produced more and more. This is back when just a normal albino leopard gecko males, I think, I'm trying to think of what I paid for that first one. I think it was $1,200, something like that. And I bought a couple of females for $1,000 a piece. And then all those possible hets were $100 a piece. And that's what started it up with that. And then I got the Las Vegas or Rainwater line of leopard geckos. I bought some blizzards very early on when they first became available. I got in on the aptors and raptors really early on. Basically, every year when Ron came out with a new morph, I would be one of the first people in line to buy them, and then I would take those and I'd make my own new morphs out of them. Like I think I was probably the first person that ever made the Super Snow blazing blizzards. And not blazing blizzards, the Diablo Blancos. Sorry, that's what it was. The Diablo Blanco. I made some of the first Super Snow Diablo Blancos. Actually, some of the first regular Snow Diablo Blancos too. So yeah, I mean, I was addicted to all those different morphs that were coming out, and I had to have them. And I bought them and put them, injected them right into my colony and started making a bunch of different versions of them. And that's kind of what I've done with ball pythons too. Ball pythons have, I think, a greater genetic diversity than leopard geckos do, even though leopard geckos, there's a lot of different mutations of leopard geckos out there. But I kind of I had the same mentality when I went into ball pythons, and probably took it to at least another level up from what I did with the geckos.
Right. And with the leopard geckos, you had tons of projects that you were dealing with, both with like morphs that you were combining and creating, but also a bunch of just stuff that you created by yourself. I think the Skittles Project is one of the premier morphs that you, kind of curated in your own facility. So how did that project start and come into fruition?
Yeah, I wish I would have done more with that project before I kind of got out of it. I still do have some Skittles line animals in my collection, but I didn't really take that project as far, and I didn't hit it as hard as I should have. It was just, my mind was being pulled in too many different directions with all the different snakes that I had and everything else. But the Skittles started probably about 10 or 11 years ago, maybe even 12 years ago. I basically, in a couple different breeding colonies, I hatched out some really unusual geckos with a lot of different colors going on with them. A lot of like lavenders, oranges, yellows, little tints of green and even blue in there. And I just, and they hatched in out of several different colonies, and I started breeding those together. And then those babies ended up being displaying more of those traits than what the parents did. And I just kind of line bred them at that point. And, as far as the name goes, I just figured, well, there's all different colors in these things. And, Skittles are rainbow fruit flavors. So these geckos are a rainbow of fruit colors. And that's kind of where I came up with that name. I think I was actually initially going to call them rainbows, but somebody else had already coined that name for a different project. So, I decided to name them Skittles. And like I said, I have a few animals from that project still in my collection, but I wish I would have kept going with it a little bit harder. Like I wish that I would have, gotten down to the point where I just worked with that project and not had all the other different types as well.
Yeah, because you did have a ton of reverse stripes, I think, is another one. I just remember looking back at your YouTube video with all the snow and eclipse reverse stripes and bold stripes and things like that. So it's really neat to kind of reflect on all the projects you had going on, because you really had an awesome diverse collection of like not just one morph that you specialized in, but you kind of pretty much had anything, I think, which is really rare to have now in the hobby.
Yeah.
Before we go on, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. Impeccable Gecko is a small to mid-sized family-operated hobbyist breeder operation. They specialize in leopard geckos with high-quality genetics. Their goal is to provide customers with the absolute best animals that they could produce, coupled with honest and transparent business methods. At Impeccable Gecko, integrity and animal welfare are above all else. Impeccable Gecko is a strong supporter of the Strength and Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available. John of Gecko Boa started early, like most of us, catching lizards and snakes in his backyard at any chance he got. Over the years, he has kept and bred more than 80 species of reptiles. In recent years, his focus has turned to specializing within the genus Eublepharus. He has worked hard to pioneer some of the most cutting-edge leopard geckos while maintaining genetic purity and honesty. He also keeps the most diverse collection of pure Eublepharus species in the world. He has coordinated with biologists around the world and has contributed DNA sampling and distribution range info to help sort out the cladistic relationships within the genus. Check out geckoboa.com for more info and available geckos. Suburban Geckos is operated by Chris Charlton. Chris's passion and enjoyment for herpetoculture, and more specifically leopard geckos, drove the desire to take his hobby to the next level. With experience in breeding and raising reptiles well over 20 years, Chris is dedicated to producing quality animals for both the hobbyist and breeder alike. Suburban Geckos treats each animal with the utmost care and respect, and cuts no corners when it comes to health and integrity of their geckos. What started off as just a couple aquariums has grown into quite the collection in just a few years, and they wouldn't have it any other way. The dedication to their animals is unparalleled and evident in the quality and health of their animals that they produce. Exemplary customer service is another area where they excel. They're readily available to answer any questions you may have regarding their animals, husbandry, and etc. For more info and to see their availability, check out suburbangeckos.com. Blizzy-Bold Leos, while new to the scene, is taking strides in following the footsteps of top-tier breeders and keepers in care and ethics while aspiring to bring fresh looks and crosses to explore latent potential. Prior to becoming a breeder, Greg of Blizzy-Bold Leos completed hours of extensive research on lines, ethics, morphs, and how certain traits interact with others in order to begin projects which are coming to fruition already in the second season of breeding. With a major focus on line breeding the correct way and customer service done right, Blizzy-Bold Leos aspires to be a breath of fresh air to the customers and keepers they encounter. Be sure to check out their Instagram, Blizzy-Bold Leos, and stay up to date on project development, availability, or just tips on having healthy animals in your care. Dab Exotics is a hobbyist breeding operation that was started in 2017. They specialize in producing healthy leopard geckos from top quality genetics. Dab Exotics is an awesome supporter of the Strengthen Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available for sale. Shane Kelly is a blue-collar, working-class guy that has a reptile breeding business with his wife and kids. They are currently working with high-quality ball python morphs, western hognose snakes, and select leopard geckos with a focus on bold stripes, and they're looking forward to adding Albie Snow and Ghost this year. They have been listening to the podcast since the beginning and are proud to be a Season 4 sponsor. Go check out their social media, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and also check out their morph market to see what they have available.
So from going to like geckos and to ball pythons, how did those skills transfer over? Obviously there's tons of morphs and things like that in ball pythons, but also the turnover in leopard geckos are so much quicker than ball pythons. Breeding is slightly different. So how was that going from breeding the leopard geckos over to the ball pythons?
Yeah, I mean, I remember back working and trying to make new leopard gecko morphs. I remember thinking that was a test in patience, but ball pythons are a lot worse. I mean, sometimes you put 6 or 7 years into a specific project, especially if you're dealing with multi-recessive things. You put so much time into producing them, and with the leopard geckos, it was a lot simpler. They had more babies per year than what like a female leopard gecko is going to give you a lot more babies in a given year than a female ball python. And they actually grow, the leopard geckos grow and mature so much quicker too. So the generational time is so much faster than ball pythons. But, so I basically took the method of how I made new leopard gecko morphs and use the same thought process to ball pythons. You just had to slow down the time frame quite a bit.
Got it. Yeah. And how was it learning like the different morphs and, just also like just money wise, ball pythons are way more expensive to get into than leopard geckos. So what was that transition like?
Yeah, I mean that was a little rough. Seeing those price tags on some of those early ball pythons versus leopard geckos. I mean, when I go out and spend like $1,000 on a leopard gecko, I mean that was nothing compared to getting into the ball python world at that time. Back in the early '90s, I didn't have money to invest in this stuff really, not a significant amount anyway. So if I wanted to buy a ball python, like a lot of my collection for ball python started with me just buying a het male. Like I bought a het albino male, a het piebald male, a het axanthic male, and I would breed those to normal females, hatch the babies out, keep all the 50% possible het females, grow them up and breed them back to a het male, or in some cases I got a visual male by then. It was a very long and slow road to get started with all these projects because it was, to go out and buy like a visual albino back then, you had to have $25,000. A visual albino was $7,500. Actually, when I bought my first albino in 2001, I think I got him. I think I paid $4,250 for him. Now I'm selling them retail on my website for $200 a piece. So obviously, I've produced thousands of them over the years. So, I've made my money back many, many times over from buying that animal. But, it was hard to get invested into ball pythons. Very, very difficult. But, I'm glad I did it, obviously, because the end, like the gross income for the business is so much higher with ball pythons than it ever was with the geckos. I mean, I was doing fine with the geckos, but the ball pythons open up a completely different level of business. So yeah.
Yeah. So with the ball pythons, what are some of your favorite projects that you love working with? Like when it comes to things that you're excited for this year and even in the future, like what are your favorite projects that you love working with?
I mean, I'm mostly going into the multi-recessives. A lot of the more cutting edge breeders are all doing like double, triple, quad code or quad recessive type things. Axanthic pieds, clown pieds, desert ghost clowns, desert ghost pieds, ultramel pieds, ultramel hypopieds. Like I'm trying to mix all that together too. So, I mean, I've got some pairings going on right now where I could produce like a quad recessive animal out of it, working on a lot of different triple recessives, sticking certain codominant genes into the projects too. There's really, I mean, I'm pretty diverse with the ball python genetics. So there's no really like one project that I'm like super excited about over another, but I mean, I like the genetic striped clowns a lot. I'm looking forward to producing my first desert ghost pieds. And probably my favorite pairing that I have going on right now is I have a pair of pastel pieds that are double het for axanthic and clown. So I could potentially make axanthic clown pieds.
Wow.
So that would be pretty cool. I've got some growing up. They won't be ready to breed for probably another year yet, but I've got a couple of I actually have 3 pieds that are triple het for ultramel, hypo, and clown. So breeding those together could make quad visual recessives of ultramel, hypo, clown pied. So
Wow.
it's pretty mind blowing. I mean, my eyes glaze over just thinking about it.
Yeah. Talk about odds over there. Like, man, that's crazy.
Yeah. And that's the problem with some of these long odds projects. You have to have so many chances at them. And ball pythons don't lay big clutches. I mean, average is probably about 6 to 7. My smallest clutch ever, I got a 1 egg clutch once, but generally the smallest are like 3, 4 eggs. The biggest I've ever gotten is 16. But, my typical in a given year, my biggest clutches are like 10 or 11. So it's, to hit on some of those odds where you've got like a 1 in 64 chance to produce something. I mean, you could breed the same pair together for 10 years and not hit on it. So some of these projects, they really take a lot of patience and a lot of, patience is the best thing I can think of. I mean, you really gotta work towards them.
Yeah. So even when it comes to the strategy, like what does it look like for you? Is it just you sitting in front of your collection and like writing things down and ideas you have for directions of projects? Because I could just imagine planning multiple years ahead for projects that you want to see come into fruition and certain genetics that you want to hit. So what does it look like planning a breeding season even for you?
A lot of it, I mean, I don't keep a whole lot of records on my computer. Like I keep a hatch chart every year that where I've got all my clutches numbered, the date they were laid, the number of eggs, the number of infertile eggs, if there were any, the pairing that produced the eggs, then the date they hatched, the number of babies that hatched, and the sex ratio and morphs that hatched. That's really all I keep on my computer is that information. The planning every year mostly is just up in my head. It's like I know what animals I have for holdbacks, and I know what I need to produce to complement those animals to get closer to the end goal of a certain project. So yeah, I mean it's usually like every I usually start my breeding season in December. I'll start pairing, and normally like with the month before that, I'll just kind of look at all the animals and I'll just decide like, okay, which male am I going to breed with which female? And it'll take me, 700 females. It takes me several days to get through it all. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, what animals do I have to pair to what to get what I want, or hopefully hit on what I want for holdbacks, and just kind of do that. So yeah, I don't keep Like I don't have like spreadsheets on my computer, like figuring out like what pairings I need to do. I just look at the animals and I say, okay, I think you're capable of producing this year, and I want to breed this male to that female, and I just kind of do it that way.
Gotcha. Well, you just make it sound so simple. Have all these years of experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of years of experience. I mean, I've been breeding ball pythons now for 23 consecutive years. And like going all the way back with the leopard geckos, I've actually been breeding those for 30 years. So, but yeah, with the ball python specifically, it's a lot of it's just a matter of just having all the experience. I mean, I feel like ball pythons are pretty much automatic for me now, like leopard geckos used to be too. They're so easy for me to produce now that I'm actually this year I'm trying to keep my production down because I mean the ball python market is not super strong right now. There's been a huge influx of new breeders coming in over the past 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of animals on the market, and I just kind of want to have a chance to sell out of everything I have right now before I start producing a lot of new babies. If I produced as many babies this year as I have over the past couple of years, I think I'd run out of space to house them all. So I'm trying to be a little bit more selective with my pairings this year, not produce the quantity that I have been. And I just want to see how that goes for a year. I mean, ideally, like I probably over the past 2 seasons, so 2021 and 2022, I probably produced 4,500, 4,600 ball pythons, something like that. I don't want to produce another 2,000 ball pythons this year. I'm hoping for like 1,000 or less. And even that sounds like an insane number. And believe me, it is. It's crazy during hatching season. But I'm trying to be a little bit more selective as to which pairings I'm doing. And I'm mostly trying to breed for stuff that I want to hold back and not so much for stuff to sell, because I still have a lot of stuff to sell from last year yet. So yeah, it's mostly just about building towards the future. I have to breed a certain number of animals every year just to propel projects forward, to get to that next step in the project towards the end goal. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to keep my production in check a little bit this year just so I don't run out of space, basically.
Yeah. So when it comes to just the ball python market and how you've seen it evolve over the years, what are some things that you've noticed in terms of that? It seems like the market is, just really interesting. And especially when it comes to reptiles, it's definitely one of the higher priced reptiles that you could get into. It's definitely something that a lot of people are looking into just because of morphs, cutting edge things. Also, just a lot of YouTubers are ball python breeders. So what are some of those trends that you've noticed within the ball python market over the years?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of newer breeders coming in over the past 3 or 4 years, and a lot of those people, some of them anyway, have spent a tremendous amount of money into the hobby to get like some of the higher end stuff. Like there's breeders that have come along in the past couple of years that are producing stuff that I'm not capable of producing. Even with as many years as I've been doing this, there's people. I mean, there's just so much diversity. There, like you can throw so many different combinations together and make brand new things. And there's a lot of people working with a lot of different projects and making a lot of new things. I don't even know how many different combos there's been produced so far, but I'm sure it's over 10,000 different color and pattern combinations. So the the changes that I've seen over the past 20 years. Back 20 years ago, it was just about breeding your pastel ball python to as many normals as you could to produce a bunch of pastels. And it was also about, it was more of a numbers thing back then. Like, I just want to produce as many albinos as I can, or as many pastels, as many spiders or whatever as I possibly can. And now it's more, I think buyers and breeders are being more selective as to what genes they're putting together. I remember probably 10, 12 years ago, you could literally throw any like 4 or 5 different codominant genes into a ball python, and that thing could be a $20,000 animal. Nowadays, and it might not even be that good looking, but it has 5 different genes in it. They're like, oh, you got a 5 gene ball python. That's incredibly valuable, even if it isn't that good looking. I think people are being a lot more selective now into pairing the right genes to each other to make the best looking babies. It's not just a matter of more genes, the better. Sometimes less is better. And you just have to have the knowledge about what the potential outcome is going to look like by pairing these different genes together and doing those kind of pairings to get attractive looking animals. Because I mean, a pretty looking snake or gecko or whatever it is, bearded dragon or whatever, is going to sell better than an ugly looking one. So
Right.
you want to try to make the most attractive animals. Because when all it comes down to it, if you're trying to sell, like eventually, like when all these really expensive animals become cheaper, you want to appeal to what like the average pet owner is going to want in their collection. And they're not going to want some, some really bland looking animal that's got 5 different codon genes in it. They might be more likely to buy something that has 2 different genes in it that's really, really stunning, really bright, really high contrast and attractive. So it's mostly just a matter of figuring out what combinations you need to put together to do something like that. And I feel like a lot of the newer breeders that have come along, a lot of them kind of get that, and they're really putting really smart combinations together and getting those really attractive animals. So that's one thing that I've definitely noticed over the past few years.
And for a lot of those people getting in, it seems really difficult, or a lot more difficult than other breeding communities to get in, just because it seems like there's so many people breeding ball pythons in the hobby, and there's so many people like that are so far ahead. Like if I were to get into ball pythons today, it would take a really big financial investment to try to like touch the surface of who someone like you has been breeding for decades now to get at. So what is it like being a new breeder trying to get into the ball python game and trying to differentiate themselves from just all the different people that are breeding so many awesome cutting edge morphs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with ball pythons in general, probably with anything to some extent, but you either have to come in expecting to take a lot of time to develop your projects, or you have to come in with a ton of money and to buy your way into projects really quickly. And, not everybody, I mean, if you have $100,000 that you can spend on ball pythons, I mean, that could get you into a good start with them, but it's not going to get you everything that you want. I mean, some of these animals are, $10, $20, $30,000 or more. And it's just not realistic for a lot of people to do that. And and I also think that just the sheer number of different genes that are out there now, like I can't even imagine trying to learn all that. Like if I was coming in to breeding, whether it's leopard geckos or ball pythons, I can't even imagine coming in cold, like not knowing anything about anything and just deciding, oh, I want to be a ball python breeder. Okay, so now I just have to learn what all these genes are. Well, that's a gigantic ask. I mean, back when I first started, I could probably count the number of morphs that were out there on one hand. There were no combos of any kind, like not even double codons. Like bumblebees didn't come out until I think 2000 or 2001. It was just so much simpler to learn those morphs. And I have a degree in biology, and I took genetics classes and stuff in college too, so I understand how a lot of the different genes work. But to learn the genetics of all these animals, like what does recessive mean? What does double recessive mean? What does codominant or incomplete dominant mean? What is dominant? Like all these different things. To learn all that, and then to learn all of the different genes that are out there and what type of gene they are, whether it's the recessive or incomplete dominant or whatever, to learn all that, and then to figure out what all these different combinations are and what genes go into them. I mean, that's an incredible amount of knowledge that you have to gain in a hurry in order to be able to, be successful with this. So I'm really glad that I got into it back when I did, because I just, I learned what all those morphs were back then and just kind of added new genes into my memory as they were coming out. And even now, like, I don't know what they all are. I mean, there's people working out there working with different projects that I have never even heard of before. And it just shows you how much diversity there is in that particular species, that nobody can have all of them, first of all. And I mean, it's just impossible to work with all of them. It's just so much out there. It'd be intimidating to get into breeding ball pythons at this point now. But I think if you have I think the best thing to do would be to pick a couple of specific projects, invest into those, and then really work those hard, and then maybe branch out into other projects at that point, or as you're able to. But yeah, it'd be hard. I mean, it's a lot of, there's a lot of breeders out there. There's so much competition with ball pythons. It's ridiculous. I mean, ball pythons have really propelled the reptile industry over the past 20 years. I mean, it's not the only thing. Even though if you go to a reptile show, sometimes you feel like, oh, another table full of ball pythons. I mean, a lot of shows are like that. But I mean, ball pythons really are one of the cornerstone species of the industry. And without ball pythons and the market and the prices that they have, the reptile industry wouldn't be where it is right now with them. So it's a good thing that they're around. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be hard to get in at this point. Especially if you wanted to get a bunch of different morphs. If you just focus, that's not quite as difficult. But to get into a lot of different projects, it would take a lot of money or a lot of time.
For sure. Yeah. And even just for myself, sometimes I look at all the different genes and I'm like, man, I just want everything. Like I want the clown, I want the G-stripe, the pieds, the desert ghost. There's just so many amazing genes that you guys have to offer. Pastels look really awesome in certain morphs, and it's like you want everything, but it's so hard to just pick a couple morphs to focus on.
Yeah.
So when it comes to really looking at the reptile industry, looking into the future, and for people who want to get into the reptile industry and really want to get to where you are one day with a lot of the hard work and dedication that you've put into it, what is some advice that you'd give to breeders who are just getting started into the reptile hobby? Some advice and some things that you would have wanted to know as you were getting started.
Well, I think the main thing is choose your species wisely. You don't necessarily just have to go into ball pythons because a lot of other people do. Figure out what species you like to work with. I heard, long time ago, like what you keep and keep what you like. So don't get into a species just because you perceive that it's going to be a moneymaker. You have to get into what you're passionate about, because you're not, if you get into something just for the money, you're not going to really, long term, you're not going to give it your all. You have to, if there's a species that you really like, no matter what it is, you kind of want to work on that. That's probably the best advice that I can think of. But mostly it's, learning from other people and applying what you've learned from those other breeders. And obviously you have to choose who you're going to learn from very carefully. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of really crazy ideas about how to do things, but you have to, pick and choose your mentors, figure out who's going to do the best job to help aid in and give you advice and as far as how to propel your projects forward. I would say don't look at it as a business. Like the day you start trying to, buy animals to raise up for breeding, don't set up a business name and start filing taxes on it or anything, and start a YouTube channel and Patreon and all that. Like, just take it in steps and grow. Let it grow over time. And mostly, like I said, mostly work with species that you want to work with and just really learn them well. I mean, there's, I know so much more about breeding ball pythons now than I did 20 years ago. It's incredible. And the only way I was able to learn that is through trial and error and just me doing it over the years and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't. So you kind of have to put in a lot of time. I mean, it was, like I said, it was 6 years before I went full time with my business, and that was working at it really, really hard if I added up all the hours I spent on that before I ever made a dime breeding reptiles. I mean, I don't even know how many hours it was, but it was pretty significant. So you have to anticipate putting in a lot of time and effort and money into the business before you're going to make anything back. I think one big mistake people make is they buy animals and they don't understand how long, like for ball pythons, how long it is until that baby female ball python is breeding for you. It could be 3 years, it could be 4 years. I've had females go 10 years before they produce for me the first time. So you can't set up a schedule, like whatever schedule you set up to where you think you're supposed to be in a certain point in the future, it's not going to work. You always have to be flexible and just kind of be able to withstand any setbacks that you have. I think is really big too. Things don't always go as planned. I mean, you'll have a ball python female. She'll grow up to 800 grams, and then she won't eat for 8 months. And then if she would have kept eating, you might have been able to breed her a year earlier than what you're able to. But you can't anticipate that. So you have to allow some of that into your time frame. So patience, I mean, ball pythons in particular are definitely a lesson in patience. And I think all reptiles are like that to some scale. Like leopard geckos, maybe they're easier because, generation to generation, it's typically only about a year. But, with ball pythons in particular, it doesn't always go as planned. Like this last summer, well, this is not really making my point. It's kind of going against it. But I had some female double het desert ghost pieds. And I hatched them out. I raised them up, and they would have been breeding this upcoming season. And I had a couple of double het males that I was going to breed with them. And I decided, I think I'm just going to spend the money on a visual desert ghost pied, because if you breed double het to double het, statistically only 1 out of every 16 is going to come out a double visual, and then the others are all going to be possible hets and stuff. So I figured, okay, if I go out and spend $10,000 on this desert ghost pied, and I breed him to those double het females, my odds go from 1 in 16 to 1 in 4. And then everything else is no worse than a 100% double het that I produce.
Right.
So I guess the moral of that story is, he actually, so I got him as a hatchling in July, and I fed him really well, and he actually started breeding in January now. So I think I've got 5 double het females. There's some codon genes mixed in there too, but they're double het for desert ghost and pied. So that way it worked out well. But he could have just as easily stopped eating at 300 grams and took 6 months off from eating, and then I wouldn't have been able to use him this year. So you have to accept the fact that sometimes things like that are going to happen. They're living animals. They're not always going to do exactly what you want when you want them to do it. But I got lucky in that case, and he's been breeding everything really, really well. I don't have any eggs from him yet, but he's been breeding everything really well. So, and the moral of that story, I think, is invest wisely. Like that, by buying him versus using those double hets, I probably have saved myself at least a couple of years worth of breedings to get to where I needed to go with him. Because basically I wanted to produce my own double visual desert ghost pied. Instead, I just decided, okay, this is a good opportunity for me to spend the money, and I know I'm going to be able to recoup it quicker than if I went to the double het to double het route. So, I guess it's spending money in the right places and in the right projects, and not just going out and buying things just because it's a good deal. A lot of big mistakes that people make with ball pythons when they first get into it is they go out and buy a whole bunch of males, because males are typically cheaper, especially with lower end projects. So then they have like 8 males and 1 female. It's like, okay, well, what did that get you? You only have 1 female. So then they sell most of those males, and then they get more, they learn over time. And the thing is to really think about what you want to do before you do it, so that you invest your money correctly.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think when you really think about what you're doing strategically and how it makes sense and falls into play, once you start really thinking about these things, it's really easy to, go to a reptile show and make a lot of really quick decisions, or you see a good deal and make a good decision online, or there's a Black Friday sale and people have great sales on things like that, but you're ending up buying things that aren't really going to help you in the future. So I think it's really awesome to really just take your time, be patient, get good advice. I think that's awesome to have people in the hobby to say like, hey, should I get into this project? Should I not get into this project? What do you think about it too? I think over time, honestly, you just really get those great connections and then are able to make better decisions with what you're doing in your breeding colonies.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Garrick, I really appreciate you just spending your time here today on the podcast, really being able to get a lot of the knowledge that you've gained over the years and just giving it to so many people today. I know people are really going to appreciate all the knowledge that you have to offer, and I'm glad that you allowed us to have that today on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad we could finally work it out with our schedules and get it all done.
Definitely. Well, before you leave, we have a few rapid fire quick questions. So how does that sound to you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. So are you early bird or a night owl?
I used to be a night owl. Back, 20 years ago, I'd be up till 1 o'clock in the morning and I'd sleep until, 8:30. Now,
Yeah.
I guess since we had kids, I got to be more of an early bird. I can kind of do either way. Like my ideal time to go to sleep is right around 10 o'clock. And I usually get up at about 6:30. That's kind of like my ideal, which is mostly what we do now. But, I got to be a little bit more of an early bird over the last, 17 years since we started having kids. So I kind of was forced into it. And my wife used to be a teacher. She still does substitute teaching, but she always had to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to school and stuff. So
Wow.
I kind of transitioned from staying up late at night to getting up early in the morning.
Okay. Are you a coffee person or a tea person?
Neither, actually. I don't
Really?
No, I've only had a couple of cups of coffee in my life, and tea isn't really my thing either.
Man, so you're just pure energy you're going off of.
I drink my share of soda, diet soda now. Usually I have like 2 cans a day ish, something like that.
Okay.
But, yeah, I get my caffeine that way.
Gotcha. Do you like to read books or are you a TV person?
Now I've always been a mix of both. I used to read books like crazy. I don't really have time to read. Well, I find that if I have time to read, I start falling asleep very quickly because I usually don't have time until later at night.
Yeah.
So I've really fallen off on the books. I used to love reading books. Now I would say I'm definitely more of a TV person, TV and movies.
Gotcha. Okay, going to ask you a few Wisconsin native questions. So northern or southern Wisconsin?
Northern.
Okay. Do you like the smaller lakes or do you like Lake Michigan?
Smaller lakes.
Okay. Nice. Where do you like to get your favorite cheese curds from?
For fresh, raw cheese curds, more or less, Mullins, which is a place just in Knowlton, Wisconsin, which is just a little bit south of Wausau. They make them fresh there, and they're squeaky and awesome. Otherwise,
Nice. Okay.
deep fried, we've got several bar restaurants right pretty close to us that have awesome deep fried cheese curds too. So yeah, do like myself some cheese curds.
Okay. Yeah, they're awesome. It's like you can't just have one; you got to have the whole basket.
Yeah, which is a problem. But yeah,
Exactly. Definitely. So I'm just gonna get 2 categories. So Culver's or everywhere else.
I mean Culver's for fast food type burgers and stuff. Culver's
Yeah.
definitely the way to go.
Gotcha. Okay. A few reptile questions. Are you a recessive person or a dominant trait person?
I'd say recessive.
Okay. There's not too many line bred things in ball pythons, but are you a line bred person or base genetic morphs?
With leopard geckos, I was line bred. Well, I was everything with leopard geckos, but I did a lot of line breeding projects. Ball pythons is not really a whole lot of line. I mean, I do line breed my stuff, but just to make slightly better versions of the previous generation. But yeah, there's no real huge impact of line breeding with ball pythons.
Okay. Gotcha. Are you a color or pattern person?
I'd say color. I like bright colors, high contrast, but it's hard. I mean, ball pythons, it kind of all goes together, like combinations
Right.
of color and pattern.
Gotcha. And then last question, favorite reptile species of all time? Any reptile?
Oh, easy. Satanic leaf-tailed gecko, Europlatus fantasticus, is easily They are the most badass, awesome little geckos in the world, and I love them to death. And I wish that I had the patience and the environment to keep them in, because I could just look at them all day long. Look at those little evil looking faces, and I just love them. And giant day geckos are a close one for me too, but the satanic leap-tail gecko is my favorite. I've said it for 20 years. My favorite animal on the planet.
Man, that's awesome. Geckos. Yeah, so cool to look at. Amazing, just display species too. Like nice decked out enclosure. So
yeah. Awesome. If I ever won the lottery, I think I'd actually set up a room in my basement just with leaf-tailed geckos, and just perfect temperatures, perfect caging, perfect environment, and just see what I could do with them. I don't really know how commercially viable it is to work with those, but I would just love to do it just to have them, because I love them so much. They're so cool.
Right. Yeah. We got to add that to the bucket list with everything else.
I've kept them and I have bred them. I did hatch a couple babies out, but they're a finicky species for sure.
Yeah, definitely. A lot more. Just especially in terms of care and things like that, and environment, humidity, and temps, and you want to make sure that's dialed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Garrett, again, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. That sounds great.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a good one.
You too.